So, I've been thinking, how would you actually make a Gladiator 2? Like an actual one? So, the thing is, the kid from the first movie, he's an actual actor. And I think he's a good actor. So, what I would do is get that exact kid, that exact actor, show him as his grown-up version, but not make up random bullshit so you can just copy-paste random shit from the original. Okay, so, if we have this guy as our protagonist, we have to show the world from his point of view. So, we make him a senator. We have him be a major part of some faction. It's been more than 20 years, so he's like a well-established senator. He has had some experience governing, blah, 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 etc., etc., etc. So, what happens? What is our point that drives the story? My view is that we should make Rome the victim of an attack. Not pretend like, oh, Rome is Rome and Rome is whatever, so Rome has to be the bad guy. No. That's not the point of the story. And it shouldn't be like, let's pretend it's an existential threat or whatever. No, it should be large portions of Rome's people live on fields and they are endangered by raiders. So the ultimate threat there would be the consequence of Mongol activity driving other people from their homes into Rome, and Rome has to defend itself. Which some idiots are gonna make it, oh, it's a border allegory, blah, 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 blah. Which, no, it's about survival and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so invaders come in, usually with Rome. I think the biggest ones are the eastern portion of the Alps, that sort of passage just to the east of the Alps, near where Venice is. They come in through that route and they loot and pillage and whatever. So now, Rome's suing for peace has left Rome weak. That should be a literal line from one of the senators. So, the kid has to help people fortify. And the thing to fortify is the stretch between the Danube and I think the Rhine. So Rome historically just had this geographic border with the Danube and the Rhine. And there were various friendly tribes on the other side and various enemy tribes on the other side. So, you send the kid out there. Now he's an adult. You send the guy out there. They focus on building forts, blah, blah, blah. But historically, archaeologically speaking, the financing was pretty on point. They didn't just make this one big fortification. They made lots of different fortifications specifically meant to fortify a specific region. And their purpose was not to block the enemy from, like a giant enemy force from coming into Rome. No, their purpose was to maintain the presence of Roman soldiers at the specific environment, which obviously, if it's a large force coming for Rome, Rome will respond, Rome will coordinate, Rome will send its force against that big force. So here's a tiny fort, it's meant to be a realistic fortification relative to local threats. So a lot of these Romans are just there and they're at their very limit of financing. So the question is, how else do you prepare your troops for the enemy, but also, how else do you boost up morale? And the cheapest way to do that, realistically, would be to use the Gladiator system. and this is very self-evident because the gladiators, they had a very important function. The audience, the spectators, had to examine the fighting styles of the gladiators. It wasn't just, here's spectacle, people are fighting. No, you watch the fights. The fights have rules. The fights are demonstrations of a particular culture's fighting style. So you gotta have that. You have that. You have some amphitheaters or whatever. You watch what's happening, blah, blah, blah. Maybe you bring some of the enemy captives to a big city, and there you do a gladiatorial battle, and you have your troops there, and blah, blah, blah. The thing is, even though he supports actually doing this, he's also a bit of an abolitionist. And he states this abolitionist idea about one day, maybe not this generation, and maybe not in 10 generations, but one day we should abolish slavery. And the thing is, his political friends are in favor of creating checks and balances for the slaves, because slaves are basically the poison that kills all empires, because the slaves ultimately at some point rebel. So the idea is you cannot have people just mistreating all the slaves. The slaves need to be maintained docile. They need to be docile. They need to be maintained. They need to do their function well enough. You need to treat your servants well. But that's it. That's it. They're not abolitionists. They can't. So you have this sort of factional, covert conversation. Listen, our faction is weak. Our main guy is saying this bullshit. We're in the middle of nowhere. Maybe we could just, end him and use his death as a pretext to push for war, because we want war, because we want to invade the enemy and see some of its lands or whatever. So why don't we hire some of the enemy's troops to invade our city, hunt down a certain set of targets, and have them attack those targets covertly? And we will use one of the slaves, one of the gladiators, as our main conspirator. The person, we will fund him, he will go out, he will do an attack. And we will say, oh, it looks like he robbed us. We must call our slaves. And this act of, message to the slaves not to rebel or whatever. We have been too lenient or whatever. And that's the engineered policy, right? That's the betrayal. And that's the main motivation. So the main guy, the kid from the first movie, gets betrayed, he gets injured, but he's still a citizen of Rome, and he's protected. And his mom shows up, and she's made sure that he is a very, very well protected after the failed assassination attempt. Various things happen in Rome. There's like a public outrage, there's an attack, etc. Right, so this simple premise gives you the idea of using gladiators as POV characters. You can have a gladiator as a secondary protagonist, but not the primary protagonist. This is important. As someone who gets routed from his village, goes to join our force to attack Rome, gets captured, blah, blah, blah. Some of his guys make a deal. He's like, I will have none of this. Like, the kid is looking out for us. I will not attack another good person because the gods have decreed that I lost that battle, or whatever nonsense is running through his head. And he's like, he wants to speak with the guy as a witness, and the guy's like, you will be my witness. Right. So these guys want to assassinate the kid. These guys want to assassinate the slave. What happens? A bunch of this guy's friends are, slaves, and they get forcibly recruited as forced gladiators, even though they didn't consent to be gladiators, but they're slaves, so whatever. So the main bad guy force is basically using them as bait in this big gladiatorial battle. And just as the guy arrives at in this city where the battle takes place, maybe it's Rome, this big ship battle happens, and the guy's like jumps in to save the guys, but also he has the justification that they are witnesses to the assassination plot against him and his faction, made the mistake of not bringing any weapons, but the bad guy faction had weapons, so the bad guy faction is doing like a self-justification thing, while the hero faction has jumped down, and the main guy is like, I hereby vow, if you help me overthrow the enemy, I will free of you, blah 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 blah, and you will for the rest of your lives be seen as friends of Rome, or half Roman, or whatever. Right. So there's this, you have your big fight, blah blah blah. They leave. Now it's a showdown between the main bad guy and the kid from the first movie. And behind the kid from the first movie, you also have the gladiator, and the bad guy is like cornered, but the bad guy has a trick, and this trick is called setting the entire Colosseum on fire from without, because he has forces outside of the Colosseum, and these forces are setting like the space around the Colosseum on fire. So it's total historical bullshit, but it's not annoying historical bullshit with edgelords and unnecessary bullshit. You have a main bad guy, you have main heroes, and you have a more final danger of death, right? People started, so you have all this stuff. People start to jump into the water to save themselves, but the water still has a trapped crocodile. And people of the bad guy faction free trapped crocodiles to attack the peoples and whatever. And they're like, a small force of crocodiles has escaped. It's all this one guy's fault. Blah, 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 blah. They're lying. Blah, blah. No, they talk outside the Colosseum, and they're like, we will say that a small force of crocodiles has escaped, and blah, and blah, and blah, and who gives a fuck. But it is a very, very clear, very not a copy of the first plot. Right? And you can call it something other than Gladiator. You can call it Rome as a sequel to Gladiator or whatever. And just make that a movie, because that's like a logical continuation from the first film, and you're not just cash grabbing. I'd see that movie.